Welcome to another Hot Topic election special, once again from the magnificent Guildhall in Hull. This time I'm with the candidates for Hull, West and Hessle, and they are Claire Thomas for the Liberal Democrats, Will Taylor for the Libertarians, and Michelle Dewberry standing as the Independent. We did also ask Christine Mackay for the Conservatives, Gary Shawes for UKIP and Emma Hardy for Labour, but none of them were able to attend. So I'm especially welcome to you three for coming along. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
First of all, Michelle, can I start with you? Independent. Independent's a valuable quality in any case, but what are you standing for?
Well, I am standing purely and simply for the people of Hull, West and Hessle. I've had enough of politicians, no offence. I've just had enough of politics and the way it is. I think politics needs to change. We should be focusing on issues and not party divisions, and that's what I'm here to do. So I'm here to bring attention to the main issues that I think will be affecting West Hull and Hessle, as I prefer to call it, to kind of forget about party politics, because what people want is a spread of good ideas, and good ideas come from all different party lines, and I'm purely and simply just about the people.
Give me a couple of examples of the good ideas.
Well, for example, I believe in Brexit. I'm a Brexiteer. A lot of people will be saying, for example, they want Brexit, but they don't want the Tories. So again, it's about the issue, not the party. So I'm here saying, okay, the way that I'll be doing politics is we'll focus on the issues and I will span party lines. So on some things, I will vote with Tory, some with Labour, perhaps some with Lib Dem, whoever. We will cross those boundaries to focus on the issues and making them right for this area. This area is overwhelmingly Brexit, by the way, but it's not overwhelmingly Tory. That's a simple example.
Well, we'll try to address some more of those specific issues in a moment. Mike, Will, I beg your pardon. Libertarian, one thinks of Ayn Rand and one thinks of Robert Nozick. These are the sort of libertarian names in the 20th century that one thinks of.
Ayn Rand would take offence at that. She hated libertarians.
Well, whether or not she liked it, she hated everybody, but whether or not she liked it, she would have, it's a good description of her. What sort of libertarian are you? Are you a sort of absolutely rugged individualist, red in tooth and claw, and no state at all?
No, we tend to be quite pragmatic on these things. We just ask a very general question, which I don't think many people in politics ask nowadays. We acknowledge that there are social problems, but can we solve those problems, or is it possible to solve those problems by giving people more freedom and more choice rather than less? Now, it is true that is not always possible, but is it not moral to at least give that a try, if it is possible, to at least consider it and give people...
As an experiment. It's a dangerous experiment, isn't it?
Well, you'd be surprised. We've got instances all over the world of how people have been given more freedom and choice, and it's actually improved things. I was just having a discussion this morning about the NHS and healthcare, and immediately, as soon as we talk about introducing competition and freedom of choice into healthcare, everyone thinks America. But that's not the best example of a free healthcare system. A free healthcare system might be more maybe Holland.
When you say free, you mean not state-run?
Not state-run. Well, nothing's free, is it? Everything needs to be paid for by somebody. But it's free in the sense that people are free to choose where they get their health care from. And Holland has a fantastic system where everyone, a little bit like America, has to buy health insurance, but there are allowances and subsidies for people who can't afford it. And all of the healthcare providers and the insurers have to compete with one another to get the business. And it's just one example, and Holland has been ranked highly, consistently at the top of the healthcare rankings across Europe. It seems to work.
There is also a question that the state is there not only just to provide those essential services, but because without it, it is unfair, because people are not equal, and so they will not be equally rewarded.
Well, no one's ever equal. We're all different, aren't we? We're all born in different places. We look different.
Well, if I may just sort of characterise your point of view, then let me take you back to the French Revolution. As always, liberty, equality, fraternity, that you would prize liberty so much higher than equality.
Equality of what? That's the big question. We are very much for political equality. You know, people are all equal before the law, but we all make different
economic
choices.
Equality.
In terms of
equality, isn't free.
Well, for everyone to be equal in terms of income and wealth, everyone would have to make the same choices, the same decisions and so on. Or the alternative is that you steal money from people who have made different choices to give it to other people.
That's the word you'd use, steal, taxation. Redistributive taxation is stealing?
anything, and I think this is Calvin Coolidge, the 30th American president, who said this. He said any tax, and I might be paraphrasing slightly, but any tax beyond what is the minimum necessary is just a form of taxation. And I think the government and all political parties are just starting to feel a little bit too entitled to people's money. I mean, we work very hard for this money.
I hadn't expected Calvin Coolidge to be quoted, but he's very welcome. Claire, what do you think of all this? The name of your party involves the word liberal. Is that something that you'd say is part of your philosophy, is that you want to have greater freedom in a smaller state?
So I'm a Lib Dem, but one of the main reasons I am a Lib Dem is because of our community politics. So I think that a lot of the things that Will has just said is actually really against what I believe in, because I believe in making sure that everybody in a community has got the things that they need. So no, nobody wants to pay taxes, but if we're talking about the NHS, the Lib Dem policy is that we should all pay a penny extra on our tax in order to make sure we've got a well-funded NHS. The NHS is in crisis.
When you say a penny, it always sounds very cheap. I'll just pay a penny extra, but that's a penny per pound.
It is. But if something is, when we've got the NHS and it's in crisis, as it is at the moment, then I think it's something that we need to consider looking at. For me, the NHS is just so incredibly important. If you look at healthcare, waiting lists, mental health care, people being able to get the care that they need at the time that they need it, that's such an important issue, especially in our area, that I think it's important that we pay that extra penny in income tax. Anybody who tells you that we can fund the NHS without finding a way like this to fund it is kidding us. They're kidding us by saying they'll find the money elsewhere. Actually, we're at a point where we need that extra money. So the money that the Lib Dems are talking about would be an extra £100 million for Hull and the East Riding to invest in our community healthcare and our mental health services and our public health. That's essential for our area.
You raised the subject of the NHS, but the NHS is a bottomless pit, isn't it? Is that there is not a top amount of money that you can invest in the NHS. And it is a lot of money that we're spending, something like 14 and 15% of GDP on the NHS, effectively on final 6 weeks of life in dribbling oblivion. Is it not futile and hubristic simply to be throwing money at the NHS?
So obviously the NHS needs to be managed properly, and there's lots more that we can do in order to make sure it's managed properly. But there are lots and lots of people who are working in the NHS who work really hard in order to make sure people get the care that they need. They deserve fair pay, they deserve the support that they need, they deserve the funding they need to ensure that they can provide that care for people that need it. If you're unwell, the last thing you want to be thinking about is there enough money for me to get the help that I need? People need to be able to know they can turn up at hospital, they can turn up at their GP, they can go and get mental health support, and that support is there for them when they need it. It's just so important.
Michelle, we've struck a specific. What would be your, if were you to be elected to Parliament, you won't have a support of a party and you'll have the luxury not to be whipped. Yeah. What would be your advocacy on health policy?
So, quite rightly, as you're saying, I don't have a detailed policy manifesto. So what I have is positions on things. And I think most people would actually share, basic principles such as the NHS. And my principle on the NHS is that I want a solid NHS, one that's reliable and efficient. And I feel very strongly about mental health being a significant part of that and taken seriously. But Claire, your attitude frustrates me because what you're talking about is more money for the NHS, more money for the NHS. What I would argue is what actually needs to happen in the NHS is a proper review of, is this system fit for purpose, the way it is the right funding going into the right places, and is it operating efficiently? Because I disagree with your point. You just said, if you're poorly, the last thing that you want is to be saying, is there enough money for me to get well? I don't know anyone that lays there going, is there enough money for me to get well? If you're poorly, what you want to make sure is actually you're in the best place to get the best care. And I don't want to put a penny more into any public service until I've been assured that actually the money that these services are getting already is being effectively spent. And at the moment, I am deeply concerned that there are a huge number of inefficiencies and wastage. If I think of a very simple example within an NHS, I know a lot of people that are employed there, including some of my family members. When you talk about case reviews and the amount of managers that attend all of these different meetings. It is ridiculous. It is incredibly top heavy, and I want proper review before more money that's chucked into a system that could be more effective.
Now, you come from a business background, as I noticed from another television station.
Yes.
Would you suggest then that the problems of the NHS are managerial rather than in terms of its defining its own objectives?
No, I'm not suggesting that the problems in the NHS are purely managerial. What I'm suggesting is, before we start asking people to again put their hands in their pockets, to again fund something, not just the NHS, right across the public sector, what I want is the money that you're already getting spent effectively? And I would argue in a lot of cases, no, it's not.
We'll
So
have to,
the
forgive me,
question
Claire, we must break there, 'cause we've got to make some money. Join me again after the break. Welcome back to a Hot Topic election special with the candidates for Hull, West and Hessle. They are Claire Thomas for the Liberal Democrats, Will Taylor for the Libertarians, and Michelle Dewberry standing as an independent. We were just talking about the National Health Service, and Will, there was a point you wanted to make. I had to cut you off at the break.
Thank you so much. I agree with Michelle on some points. I don't think the NHS is a managerial issue. I think it's structural. People often criticise privatisation of the NHS, and I absolutely agree, actually. I think the way the government does privatisation is completely ineffective. Because when the government privatises something, it makes the government the customer. And so the NHS is therefore incentivised to work for the government and hit all the government measures and targets. Now, most businesses don't work for the government, they work for customers, and they have to satisfy customers. And I apologise if I'm using the word customer rather than patient.
It's all right, we're no longer passengers on the trains.
Yes. So I think if customers, patients, had the freedom to choose where to get their healthcare from, you might find that the NHS might structurally have to reorganise itself in order to satisfy the needs of patients and to deliver value for money for those patients, and also to deliver it at a time and place that is convenient for them in regards to waiting lists. And we see the same thing with schools, like academies. I actually agree, the way the academy system is set up is completely ineffective. Academies, profit-making businesses, and I ideologically I have no issue with a business educating children, but they don't work for parents. They work for the government. It's the government that funds them. I would like to see more choice for parents to be able to shop around and decide where they send their children. That would drive up standards.
Claire, a smaller privatised NHS, surely a vote winner.
No, not at all. but I just think that Michelle and Will are both trying to kid themselves by if you think that the NHS doesn't need more money and doesn't need that extra investment.
Maybe
but
it
what
does.
I do think, though, is obviously we need to keep reviewing waste and management costs and the way things are happening. But the idea that another complete restructure of the NHS is the best way to spend the NHS's money, I just think is ridiculous.
Well, there is
because
one
actually,
basic life skill, and that is to balance a budget.
Every time there's a new government, and I don't think that's healthy. What is needed is for the people who work in the health services to have the support that they need in order to do a good job. Actually, what do you want from the MP for Hull, West and Hessle? Do you want somebody who's going to go in and call for extra funding for our NHS and for our local health services? Or do you want somebody who's going to talk about the fact that potentially we need a restructure, we need to look at where the waste is and that sort of thing? We want somebody that's calling and fighting for the funding that we need for our local health services.
So you basically want to force the good people of Hessle and West Hull to throw more good money after bad. That's what I'm hearing. 4 or 5 years ago,
if you think
they
that
spent
it's bad thing to spend money
billion.
on the NHS, then we know what you're saying. People need the healthcare they need.
They
Are you
spent
arguing against funding for the NHS?
If it's going to waste, absolutely, yes, that is our money. They spent £10 billion on a failed IT project 5 years ago, and that is the official figure. And so you're telling me there's
again,
no...
that's a managerial point. I mean, it may have been money incompetently spent, but it wasn't.
Absolutely.
It wasn't that wasn't a deliberate intention and purpose.
The problem
of wasting
is,
money.
it's very easy to spend other people's money because the taxpayer and borrowing on the markets is just a bottomless pit of money. If there was a real possibility that they would run out, they might actually decide to spend it a little bit more effectively.
Well, I think actually we should be saying we live in a community, we all live together, and actually it's important that we all play our part. Different people have different roles to play, but actually we should all be contributing to our communities to ensure that those vital local services are there for people when they need them. And not everybody needs them all the time, but at some point all of us will need those local services, and we need to make sure that they're there for people when they need them.
Can I just make one point?
Yeah, of course.
I'm not against funding for the NHS. I've already made it clear that one of my principles is a solid, stable, reliable NHS. I'm not in favour of privatisation of the NHS. What I'm against is just calling as the first point of call for extra money to fix problems, because extra money can't always fix problems. You have to fix the problem, and then if we need extra money, then you'd have that as a secondary thing, not as the primary thing.
I want to move on. We talked about the NHS a lot, and I think we've really been talking about the NHS as a kind of exemplar of the state, apart from anything else. But I want to try to talk about the state in a different context of Brexit. And Michelle, you said that you supported Brexit.
Yeah.
How will Brexit make the people of Hull, West and Hessle freer and richer?
Well, I think what you need to do is, I regard Brexit as an opportunity now, an opportunity for change. So I believe very much in entrepreneurialism, dynamic thinking. I think the whole economy, the jobs market, etc., is on the cusp of change, regardless necessarily of Brexit. We're moving into a deeply technological age. Technology doesn't really care about political unions such as the European Union. And what we need to be doing is, now that we've got rid of some of the restrictions of the EU, or we will have rid of them, we have this blank sheet of paper to reimagine what could our future look like, what could our future industry look like. We need to be working hard with the businesses that we already have in the city, to work with them to keep their business here, continue to expand their businesses. But we also need to be encouraging people to create new businesses, to be more entrepreneurial in their thinking, to seize this opportunity of what we call the fourth industrial revolution, which is technology, smart automation, artificial intelligence. That is the thing that's going to change this jobs market. Brexit will have an impact, sure, but technology is a huge change.
Claire, you're representing the only one of the main parties that regrets Brexit, or that would wish to have an opportunity to possibly one day rejoin, or at least have another referendum on whether the deal in 2019 seems acceptable. But at the moment you have only 8 MPs, and 9 MPs. Of course, it's by-elections, they confuse things, don't they? But you're not going to be in a position in Parliament really to advocate Euro-friendly policies.
I mean, in terms of the question on how are Lib Dems doing at the moment, actually, we're doing really well. We've got a record membership, so, Lib Dems have been a party have been around for a long time, but we've got more members than we've ever had before. And if you look at the local elections in this area, for example, last year in the Hull, West and Hessle constituency, Lib Dems had won the popular vote. We had more votes than Labour. Nobody else got very many votes at all. So, I think we are doing better as a party. And I think actually on Brexit, it's really important. For me, it started with a democratic process. We started with a referendum, and it's important that it ends with a democratic process as well. If you were going to go and buy a house, you would go and get a survey, you'd read the contract, you'd find out what that deal went before you made that final step. And I think that the people have a choice, should be able to have a choice at the end of the day and have their say, a democratic say on the deal that happens with Brexit. For me, I'm actually quite worried about the impact of Brexit for our local area in particular. So we do a lot of trade, and what will that do to our local businesses? There are businesses that might get manufacturing companies that have components from different European countries. If there's now a new bureaucracy between overcrossing borders, that could be a real big impact for some of our local businesses. So it's really important that that the right deal happens if we're going to have a deal, and that somebody locally is able to fight for that. We get a lot of investment from the European Union.
Here specifically,
and I do not trust the Tory government to make sure that Hull gets a good deal and gets that investment back. Some of that investment is around skills for people to be able to get jobs in things like the new renewables industry that's happening here. It's really important that local people are able to get the skills they need to get good jobs. those are the sorts of things we should be fighting for.
Will, presumably for you as a libertarian, nationhood and nationality are entirely irrelevant. It's all about the relationship between the individual and the state, and the relationship in which the state should
To a large
be
extent, yeah, to a large extent. I mean, me personally, as a libertarian, I voted Brexit. I strongly support Brexit, but for very different reasons, I think, to a lot of people. I think everyone has their own reason.
Would it not be more consistent? Forgive me, I'm
Sure.
asked out of curiosity to have voted to remain, because libertarian belief would suggest that we all have the same enormous rights over government, over the state, and that the location of your birth is irrelevant to the laws which you must obey.
Yeah, it's a really good point. For me, it was all about should Brussels be allowed to have any right to force me or any of my friends to do what we don't want to do. There is a huge amount of
regulation. The same
regulation.
question could be asked of Westminster, though. Should Westminster have the right?
Absolutely.
So it's irrelevant, really, isn't it? In
Yes.
libertarian philosophy, Brussels or
Yeah,
Westminster?
we follow the broad principle of the closer power and control is to the individual, the better, as far as we're concerned. So yes, as far as we're concerned, we've removed a whole level of unnecessary government. Now I'd like to see, and I think Michelle might be with me on this, more control brought back to the local area.
Very quickly, I must stop you, forgive me, because that's one more thing. Michelle, you are the leader of your party, so I can't really ask you what you think of in internal
I've just got a quick
perception.
question for Claire, though, if I may.
Okay, very
Claire,
quick.
Yeah, it's super quick. Claire, if you get the referendum that you won and people say no to the deal on offer, are you proposing that we just stay as we are within the EU?
I think that if
Yes or no?
Wait.
so they
saying
That
you're
is
out.
something that we're going to have to work out during the campaign, all of you. Thank you very much, and join me again for the next hot topic.